Okay, so welcome to week 8. It's almost done, so we've got 3 classes left after this, and then we're done. And then I think we're doing the web services and REST certification next. If you want a challenge, you should do that one. Okay, so the quiz this weekend didn't go as well, but a lot of the questions were Rory specials. So Rory did a lot of the questions from last year. So you can sort of see the bottom question is like only 10%, so only one person got that one right. So let's go and have a look and see what happened there. I think it was the question was the last one. So it's showing correctly here. Yeah. All right, so this one is something it's just something you need to know from the spec, and everybody see there. Should I go on the screen?
Yeah.
Otherwise, let's just turn around. Because I tried the HDMI cable this morning, because otherwise it makes the screen so small. It's actually a bit better. So the main thing about when you're looking at the JE spec, or the EJB spec, and message-driven beans, the only thing that the container really needs to do is it needs to allow a message-driven bean to read from a queue or from a durable subscription, so from a topic. That's the only requirement it's got. So a lot of these options here are about how many JMS queues and...
Sorry to bug you guys. There's a meeting here at 9 o'clock and they need to clean the boardroom and all that. How long will you guys still do?
Well, we've usually until about 8, just before 8. So you can clean, are they going to vacuum or?
Let me just find out. No, they need to vacuum too. Yeah, they need to vacuum as well.
Okay, we'll try and finish this up quick because it's a EJB certification course. We do this every Wednesday at 7. So we've got people on Hangouts and everything, so it's super difficult to.
Okay, 8 o'clock is too late.
We'll try and finish. I'll try and speed it up and try and. So if you can do the vacuuming late, you can clean up the other stuff around which you can do the vacuuming at the end.
Okay. 8 o'clock.
We'll be done before then.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, no problem.
About that.
Okay. Okay, so as I said, a lot of these things around here, sort of how many queues can connect to how many whatever, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you want to, the containers are going to stop if you want to connect 5 different beans to the same queue. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but it's not going to guarantee which one's going to receive it or whatever. So the main thing is just looking for the actual statement. So the first, second, and like fourth one is only about how many queues are connecting to how many containers and all that stuff, which doesn't really matter. That's got nothing to do with the spec. And there's nothing that says this is the correct amount. There's best practices, but there's nothing that says this is the way to do it. Then the last one is also talking about durable subscriptions, and at each instance in a pool will receive a message, which isn't correct. It's each bean, so that even if there's 10 instances of the same bean, the container is only going to deliver it to one of them, because only one of them is going to handle it. It doesn't matter that there's 20 instances. That's not what the durable subscription means. It's just one. If you, as the specific bean, is subscribed to receive this topic, it will only receive it once. Doesn't matter how many instances of that bean you're running. That's to do with pooling, and some containers don't even pool beans. So that's got nothing to do with that. So the only one is actually the third one. You must allow deployment of message-driven bean to listen to durable subscriptions. So that's about anything that the spec says about that. So it's. Then the other one was question 4. And this is a bit of trick on. So the things can a servlet receive an asynchronous message. So not really, because a servlet is like a web page. Once you hit it, it comes back and it processes it. So asynchronous means that you can send the messages and come back anytime. You can receive it anytime. So if you're not actually going to hit that servlet when the message is supposed to come back, you're never going to get it back. So it doesn't make sense to do it that way. If by chance somebody does go and hit that servlet, or when there's a message waiting, they might get it back, but there could be 20 messages waiting. You're going to process all 20, or you can hit it 20 times. So at the code you can do it, but it's not really going to be asynchronous processing. It's going to process when you actually hit that servlet. And the other one was just the book. So I see that, what is it? 70%. So 7 of you guys Googled it or went to go and check it out. I don't know why the other 3 of you guys didn't do it. Sort of points for free there. The other questions were straightforward ones about the light containers and if they're there or not. So like I said, in the certification, the stuff around here will be sort of code type things and difference between topics and queues, and maybe something around the spec like that last question, question 10 that most people had wrong. It'll be that type of questions around the specific topic. It's nothing too major. I'll just go and check because I've got the breakdown. I'm sure it wouldn't change of the number of questions, but most of the topics they ask about between 4 to 6 questions on each topic. So some like this topic will probably be only be 4 questions, but I'll go and double check. Okay, any questions on anything on the quiz there? Okay. So this week's topic is the last week we're doing anything on beans, so it's message-driven beans. And the topic I'm looking at there is the same type of stuff, when to use message-driven beans, and then just creating one and the life cycles around it. In the exam, there's a lot of stuff around the configuration of the beans, and they also, we're doing transactions in like 2 weeks, but they also look at a lot of transactions and when messages get delivered and when they don't get delivered, and that type of stuff. So as a specific topic, it's sort of the same thing looking at the life cycles, when you're allowed to do what, when something's going to print out in the console, looking at the configuration. So if it's configured this way with the active property, we look at it now, you know, what type of message is going to receive, or what type of messaging model can it use, that type of stuff. So today, we're looking at just at the messaging beans, the little green bean there. And so last week we're looking specifically just at beans, and from next week we're looking at container managed parts of the beans. So first is looking at why to use message-driven beans and why it's better than using like the normal stateful session beans. So looking at message-driven beans, most enterprise applications, not all of them, will probably need some sort of messaging somewhere in them. Whether they're going to be using Java beans for it or not, but there'll be some sort of messaging. These days, they sort of do that loose coupling, like you mentioned last week, through REST services, but there's still some legacy stuff which you're not going to get away from. You're going to have to use some sort of MQ messaging there. MDB is also asynchronous, so a message-driven bean is asynchronous. That's also one of the reasons we want to use it, because it can receive a message without us having to say, listen here, look if there's a message. As soon as the message comes in, the container will go and say, okay, well, is there a bean looking for it, and drop it for that bean, and the bean will handle it. So you don't have to go and pull in any specific logic like with a servlet, or if you're going to look at something like a singleton bean or a stateless bean or a stateful bean, you know, there you're going to have to go and pull the whole time and say, listen, is there a message, is there a message? Where with a message-driven bean, that's not the case. The container takes care of that for you. And also, as I mentioned last week, with the loose coupling for a client of a message-driven bean, or that's going to send something to a message-driven bean, it just knows there's something on the other side that's going to receive. It doesn't care, doesn't have to have an actual instance of it or an instance of the business interface for it. Like with the session beans, you have to have an instance of that interface. You need to actually go and call a method on there and know about it. Message-driven bean is not the case. The only other bit is you shouldn't go and now use message-driven beans everywhere, because you need some sort of asynchronous processing. And one of the things, sort of 3 things I say you need to have in place if you want to use a message-driven bean is you need to want loose coupling, reliability, and asynchronous processing. So you need to have all 3 of those. Otherwise, sort of look at CDI and the normal asynchronous method annotation on the session beans. There's other things also like the JMS, the message-driven beans. The JMS itself is a bit, it's not great to use, because a lot of the providers, so if you're looking at like IBM WAS and JBoss and so on, they've all just got their own JMS provider, whichever they're using, whether they're using MQ, IBM MQ or HornetQ or OpenMQ, whatever they're using, and they generally, it's difficult to go and change that out. So if you're using WAS, you're not going to use HornetQ on that. It's a bit difficult to get that working. Rory mentioned it last week as well. And the reason for that is when it comes to transactions, because when you send that message for the consumer, for your JMS provider, they actually know, listen here, this is part of a transaction, the message has come down, and that transaction is complete, it's not rolled back, I can now go and deliver it. To get that working, it's quite a mission, because the spec and all that works. It doesn't seem there's a proper API for the provider to do that, so they generally only do their own little provider for themselves. So that's sort of one of the reasons that, if you're using MQs, generally using the MQ that comes with your provider. You're not going to use anything else. There is another thing, though. There's what they call the Java E connector architecture. So that's if you, or JCA. And that's if you need to connect anything else, any type of legacy systems. It could maybe be like a file system or a CSV file, or could be a REST service, whatever else is on the other side. As long as it complies with that specific JCA API, you can use that. And that's transportable across the different providers. That's not provider specific like the MQs are, because that API actually makes provision for transactional, that stuff, where the JSM one doesn't really make provision for it. So for the exam, you don't need to know that, just be aware of it, that there are other options when it comes to messaging, not just the normal JMS providers. There's other ones as well. So why would you want to use interview messaging? And it says the one big reason for it as well is you avoid complexity. So like we saw last week when we did the consumers and the producers and stuff, to actually go and consume a message, you have to go and inject the resource, get the connection factory, get a connection from that, get a session, from the session create a consumer, and do all that. So with message-driven beans, we'll see you don't have to do any of that. You just have a method that gets the message and you consume it and use it. So much easier. One thing about JMS that makes it worth looking at is reliability, and that's one of the reasons you might want to use MDB, is if you want something that's really reliable, because that message is going to be delivered, it's going to be delivered once at maximum. So even if the server goes down, usually those providers will store it somewhere, so if it comes back up again, that message is still available, so you're not going to lose it. So robust processing, like I said, can take part in the JTA and the Java Transaction API, but because it can do that, it makes it difficult to move your MQ stuff from provider to provider. And like also for the MDBs to start consuming a message, you don't have to go and actually call a method or inject or poke it or do something to it to say, okay, well, listen, you've got a message, do something about it. It'll automatically just pick it up and start using it. And then just looking at some of the usages around message-driven beans, is you need to make sure that you pick the right messaging model. Like I said last week, either point-to-point using queues or pub-stub using topics. Don't overuse it. Also, when you are going to be using the messaging beans, don't put all your business logic in the on-message method. So the method is going to be called. You can probably even go and call another bean from there, but you don't want to put a bunch of logic in that on-message. Like if you ever want to move that bean or change that logic, and you don't want to have the same everything at on-message. The same way you'll do any other type of programming. You don't want one giant message in there, one giant bit of logic in there. You can also use filters on message-driven beans. So you can have one queue with different MDBs on it, but the way that you split them up between the different MDBs is by filtering it. So you might have a property on your message that says it's private or it's public. And it's the same queue that both beans are listening to, but the one filters on private and the other one filters on public. So you can do it that way as well. If you are going to use filtering, though, it does slow down the processing. Not a hell of a lot, but if it's going to be processing a lot of messages, you'll see a difference between filtering and not filtering. Better practice is to rather have two different queues. Have a private queue and a public queue, if you want to do it that way, if it is possible. When looking at the type of payload you're going to be sending across the MQ stuff, don't necessarily just go for XML, because that's what's available. If you're going from one Java client to another Java client, you can do serialization, so you can actually do an object across it, which will make it a bit smaller. You can do text if it's something simple. If you're doing text, you can probably send JSON across as well. You can use JAX on the other side if you want to serialize and deserialize it, but don't necessarily just go for XML every time. Then the same thing as with the singleton beans, with the stateless beans, just go and look at your pool sizes. So you can sort of say how much the provider can scale the amount of beans in a pool up and down. And that's sort of the same thing. So if you're going to need 100 beans to process all the messages and you've put the maximum at 80, then some of them are going to start waiting, and your clients are going to sort of wait for that messages to be processed, same type of thing as before. And also looking at the different options. So when we are going to consume messages, you can either see the type of acknowledgement mode, and the two types are pretty much auto-acknowledge or duplicate or allow duplicates. And the other thing is non-transactional message-driven beans, where you don't actually, if the message isn't processed and you don't care that it's not processed, you can maybe, there's some other way you can pick up that it wasn't processed before, you can also switch that off. And on the acknowledgement mode, just going back there, the auto acknowledge and duplicate acknowledge, most of the time it doesn't actually matter. The provider will probably ignore it. For the exam, you need to know the difference between it, but in real life, the provider generally ignores it. The only time it really makes a difference is if you're doing bean managed transactions. So when you're actually taking care of transactions, you're calling begin transaction rollback in your bean code. When you're doing bean managed transactions, that's the only time it really makes a difference. What will happen there is if you're doing your own transactions and you actually send the message and you haven't committed to your messages, the provider will wait until you commit it before sort of sending it on. So if you roll back or something, the message will just be pulled back. So that's the only time it really makes a difference. What's supposed to actually happen is when you do duplicate OK or auto-acknowledge is if you do auto-acknowledge, your message-driven bean will say, okay, I've got the message, and actually the provider will wait for your bean to say, I've got it, and then say, okay, well, I'm not going to deliver it again, it's been delivered. If duplicate's OK, it actually doesn't care. It'll go and check every now and again, listening, have you got the message? And if the bean is maybe still processing, it'll redeliver that message again. So it might deliver a duplicate message. But like I said, in real life, you don't have to worry about it. The providers are quite clever about it. So the only time I really do that is if you've got bean managed and you don't care about the receiving duplicates, you can handle it. But doing duplicate OK will make your processing a bit faster. Any questions? Nothing yet. All right, so creating and configuring message-driven beans. So the same as all the other beans, there's some other annotation you can use, or you can do it through the deployment descriptor. So you're going to mark your bean as message-driven, and then we're going to also use the activation config property as another one that's in there. It's like a combination of those two to set up your bean. And because something's actually going to, you don't have to go and check every time is the message. Something's actually going to prompt your bean. So listen, here's a new message. It needs to implement that message listener interface, and that has got an on-message method. So as soon as the message comes in that bean can consume, your provider will go and say, call that on-message method and pass the message into it. So there's a little example of what that might look like. Most of the times, you've got this option where you can actually go and on your message-driven bean itself, and I'll show you in the demo, we don't have to go and say implements message listener like at the bottom here. You can actually, as part of your setup, exposing message-driven bean, you can just say which interface it's using, but I doubt you'll ever see that anyway. Then just looking at the deployment descriptor type, this example, same as before, you can give it a name, you give it a class that it's going to be in, and then you give activation properties. So it'll be an activation config, and you have a property, and your property will have a name and a value. So pretty much the same as we've got here. We've got a name, property name, and a property value. So pretty simple. Then looking at activation properties, and this is sort of one of the things they do focus on a bit for this certification, just because it's easy to trick you up on it. And this is knowing what each of those activation properties do and when to use them and what the values can be. So looking at something like the subscription durability here. So as an example, in the exam, they might say is the true or a false value that you have to give it. You know, where it's actually a durable or non-durable is what you actually need to give. This is that they might ask you in an exam, give you a piece of code and say, well, how would you make a thing durable? A topic durable. So then they might put a bit of something that's actually a queue, not a topic. They might put a topic and say subscription durability is equal to true instead of durable. And then you just need to pick that out. So I was going to say, most of the time you can use the defaults for these, or know what the defaults are. So anything you really need to, if you want to go and set something, you can set the destination lookup to say if lookup type. Where's that? Destination type to say if it's a queue or a topic, but the providers are quite clever to figure that out. If you're saying, well, I'm looking for this specific destination, it knows it's a queue or a topic, and it'll maybe set it up for you. As in the message bean itself, so we've got the destination lookup, we can use the GenD name. So, and that's using actual lookup. So when we spoke about the resources and lookups and GenD stuff a few weeks ago, the two ways you can actually get that thing is by using the map name or the lookup. But the lookup is can be used across providers. It's not provider specific, where the map name is provider specific. So message driven actually only has a map name option. So if you want to use the lookup option, which is portable, you have to use the destination lookup option here. Then you've got stuff like the client ID, and this is if you're going to connect to a provider and you want to see which clients are connected to it. You can give it a client ID, so if you actually go to something like ActiveMQ, you can see who's connected on that specific queue, who's subscribed to a topic, and you can see a name there. Then the other bit that is this message selector, and that's what I mentioned before, where you can have a few different beans listening to the same queue or topic, and you maybe have properties on there, like a private and a public property, and you want to say, okay, well, is it true or false? So in that way, you can actually go and then on your bean, although two different beans listening to the same queue, they can receive different messages based on the property or the headers or the header details. So I've got a slide here about actually getting information out of there. I think for the certification, you don't necessarily need to know this, just to be aware of it. I can't remember, I don't think they actually ask questions, message select the questions specifically and say, okay, well, how will you filter this down? If they do ask something like this, it's normal SQL. So if you know a SQL where clause, this is how it works. So it's instead of saying where fragile equals true, where fragile will be a property that you've set, you'll just say fragile equals true. It's based on the SQL 92 specification, and it's pretty much straightforward. Is null, is not null, equals to, is like normal type of stuff. One thing though I saw in the EJB in Action book, if you guys are reading the additional books there, they actually say like fragile is true instead of equal to true, which doesn't work. I don't know. I tried to look it up. I tried to play around. I couldn't get it to work. I tried on Tommy and on Glassfish. If you say is true, the bean doesn't even deploy. So I'm not sure where that comes from, or if somebody's used that, or somebody can tell me about it. Rory doesn't know about it either. So if it is a is true thing, I'm not sure if that's according to spec. I couldn't see anything in the spec about what's actually supposed to be. But fragile equals true will work, not fragile. So they kind of added like fragile is true, like this, which I don't know, didn't make sense to me. There's any SQL that you write like that. All right, so let's go and create a message-driven bean and to see how all this works. No questions yet. Okay. All right, so what I've got is I've just got a controller that's just going to send a message. So it's I are Baboon or I am Weasel. I don't know if you guys ever watched that cartoon. I loved it. I am Weasel. All right, so it's got a, and then I've also, just to show some of the way the properties work, I've got a property that I set here, which says Baboon true or Baboon false. Once again, I'm using Tommy. So on Tommy, just setting up a topic. So we're actually going to use it like a topic, but we did a queue last week, so I'm doing a topic this week. And that's about it. So I'll just set that up on our listener bean. I also saw that using the logger, the default util logger that comes with Java, the IntelliJ prints it out a bit better. It doesn't mix it all up like it did the other times. Like I said, so to change this into a message-driven bean, we add the add message-driven annotation on top of it, and then we just go and give it a name. So the name is the resource we're looking for. This is the idea. If you want to use a Gendi name, then you're going to either use map name here, so you can do map name, or you're going to have to use the activation property and actually do the destination lookup there. That's the one bit we need to do, and the other bit we need to do at the minimum, yes, just implement the message listener interface. It gives us a on message method there. So once again, we're just going to get the base message in here. So we're going to need to, we need to know what type of message is coming in, whether it's a text message or an object message, whatever it is, I need to cast it to the correct one there. I'm going to go logger.info. So we're going to have a text message here. I'll pass the message to that. Normally you'll go and check if this is null and all that stuff, so don't ever, my demos aren't production type code. So yeah, and check and make sure that it is a text message and that it isn't null. I'm just going to do get text. Also, whenever you're doing the JMS stuff, you're going to have to watch out for JMS exceptions. So they might ask these type of questions, certification as well, where they put code like this where there is no JMS exception. Just be aware of it. So in theory, that should be it. So that's the minimum we need to do. So to get this to listen to a topic, you need to set up our queues and our connection factories the way we did last week. We're going to use Glassfish or any other type of provider. If you're using Tommy, we can just set up an atomic config. Set annotation, or you can use a deployment descriptor. You need to let it know which topic or queue to listen to, either if you're using the name, map name, or the destination lookup. And then you need to implement the message listening interface and have your own message method there. So I'm clean. I'm just going to use Tommy to run it. Put it up. And like pretty much all other beans, when we start up the provider, or when we start up our provider there, it actually goes and checks all your beans and sets up the deployment configuration for it and all that. So if there's any problem with your actual bean setup, so if the demo topic was actually a queue and you said, well, I want to listen to this as a queue, it won't deploy. It'll actually stop it. So let's start this up. Okay. So I'm just going to use Postman. Yes, I'm just going to use Postman to do the REST call. So if you guys haven't used Postman, it's just a Google Chrome plugin. So just search as one of the apps you can put on Google Chrome. You can use it. It's kind of nice and quick and easy. And the new versions, they've got paid for stuff, but the normal free version actually works fine. So it's a bit lighter than using something like SOAP UI. I kind of enjoy it. So it's going to send the message there. So we can do OK, and then we go back here. We can say that it print out our two messages that we send there. That's cool. So the other bit you can do on the activation properties here is we can go and say activation config, and that's you can give it an array or a list of activation properties. That activation config property, and there's always be a property value and a property name. Just to be aware of, and it just isn't going to be in the exam, is that the stuff in the JMS that we're doing is JMS specific. So if you're going to use any of that other JCA messaging stuff, then these properties will be different. They'll use different properties. So they're not necessarily going to use topics and durability and all that type of stuff. So one of the bits we can use is we actually tell it that it's what destination type it is. So name is destination type, and the value is it's a topic. This isn't really going to make a difference. And let's keep the same around. Maybe just say what the acknowledgement mode is, yeah. Acknowledgement mode is okay. You can add it in like that and configure it like that as well. So it doesn't really make a difference what you've seen here. The other bit you can also do here, so instead of doing the implements message listener there, you can do a message listener interface, and then you'll actually go into message listener and you'll give a class that it is. You don't have to do the implements message listener here. You'll still have to do the on message method though, because it's going to look for that. I'm not really sure which other message list interfaces you'd use and why you want to use it. There might be some other provider-specific ones you might want to use. But for the exam, just know this message listener. That's what you use. So you can set it up like this as well. So go and redeploy this. It'll do exactly what it did before. Okay, doesn't look like any errors. No. So do the sender again. And you can see it sent out 2 messages there. Then the last thing I just want to show you is just that message selector. Sorry, it's activation property. Activation config property. So message selector. Okay, so we just want all the baboon values to come through here. Should I get the property name right here? So this, whenever you do a message like this, it is case sensitive. So it's not insensitive. So if I wrote baboon lowercase, it's not going to pick it up. So it's a baboon equals true. What we should just see now is, instead of seeing IR baboon and I am weasel, you should just say IR baboon. Let's package this again. Tried to do wrong. From name equals value. Ah, okay. Did I do this? Okay. Right. Sorry. Let's see what I did. Let's see here. Okay, so when I do that REST call again, we should only say the IR baboon message. Let's deploy out. So you can see, so it only listens. So although both messages are on the queue, and if we go and check, we'll see the other message is actually still waiting on the queue before it comes down. Right. So it's probably better if you're going to have 2 different ones to have 2 different queues to listen on. It'll scale much better, work a lot easier. All right, so the last bit around the messaging is just the life cycle. So like the stateless and singleton bean, it's sort of got a pretty simple little life cycle. It either doesn't exist or it's in the pool, ready to go. You've got your post-construct and pre-destroy methods. And whenever the message listen method is called, it'll go and call it. So it'll work the same way as the stateless bean, where the calls are serialized. So if there's more than one bean, the provider will decide which one to call next, and each bean will only receive 1 message at a time. You won't receive more than 1 message. So you don't have to worry about concurrency, anything like that there. Is anything else here? I said the same way is those lifecycle ones are executed in the unspecified security or transaction context, because you don't know when they're going to start up. Also, the provider doesn't necessarily need to start the bean up when you call the message. When you send the message the first time, it could have started up before as well. Or if it needs to, it might start up more beans in the pool. And you can also go and specify it with via annotation or in the deployment configuration. All right, so let's go and add some. Public constructor. post-construct method. Just for message-driven beans, for any of these types of beans, whenever they sort of ask questions about the life cycle stuff, they might give you a few different options about, you know, which method is going to be called. So then they might have a post-construct but it returns a boolean, you know, something like that, which isn't valid, it needs to be avoided. Just stuff like that that be aware of. Logger. The different here is the pre-destroy doesn't necessarily get called when we close down the provider. It's, I don't know, Tommy doesn't do it, I don't see Glassfish doing it. It probably just assumes that it's shutting down, it's not going to do anything else there. If it is doing it, I'm not seeing it in my log anyway. And I tried doing it with log4j and LSF and all that, it doesn't print it out. I don't know where it is. But I'm pretty sure it calls it. That's what the spec says it's supposed to do.
What would you immediately destroy that?
If you've got any resources, so if you maybe for whatever reason have a database connection open, so you might be storing something about a message if you've processed it before, but any type of resources, but you shouldn't really, like say, so if you're on message stuff, your message-driven bean should just be a way of getting the message and not necessarily processing it. Yeah, so it's, but it's the same thing we've got some other. One of the use cases I can think of is if you possibly could receive duplicate messages, you might want to keep track of whether you've processed it or not. So that you might have a database construct, well, have you sent this email for this customer yet? Yes or no? You know, and then you might want to just go and say, yeah, I've sent the message, and just go and mark it as yes, I've sent it. Yeah, so it's. I'm going to put anything in there. We're not going to see it. We'll just put stars in there, see if we can see it. So I'm going to package it and run it. Okay, so it doesn't start up the message-driven beans in the start. What you can see is there, same as always, construct gets called first, then your resources will be injected, then your post construct is called, and then your message is consumed. Ah, there it is. I actually printed it out this time. So yeah, there it is. It's the first time I've seen it in the log. Awesome. So, so there's the pre-destroy. It gets called there. All right, so that's message-driven beans. And I say sort of most of the questions that they try and trick you up there will be around the configuration. What type of configuration you do, what those configuration means, what are the valid values for those configurations. Something like using the destination lookup versus destination type, so they might mix those two around, you know, and you need to pick that up. So stuff like that they'll try and trick you up with the acknowledgement mode or the subscription durability, true or false instead of durable, non-durable. The other bit is just around transactions. The important thing there to remember when we look at transactions again is if your bean actually starts and stops the transactions or begins the transaction or commits and rolls back the transaction in the code, so it's actually a bean managed transaction. If it sends a message somewhere in that scope and rolls it back, that message isn't delivered. So anything that would have happened if that message was delivered isn't going to happen anymore. So it's the only thing that they'll try and trick you up with those types of things. Okay, let's see if there's any questions. Yeah? Nothing? All right. All right, so next week we're kind of deviating from the flow of the topics, of the actual exam topics. So instead of doing, what do we have done next week? I can't remember. We're doing interceptors next week. So we're not doing the exam topics that was next on the list. We're doing interceptors. So it's a bit of reading there. And this week's exam or quiz is 10 questions again, 45 minutes. I think this week is a little bit more codey. I don't really know how many Rory questions there are. So hopefully we'll do a bit better. And then the attendance keyword is durable. So like the subscriptions, it's durable. All right, and that's it for the week. Anybody, if you can't, because it is a long weekend, if you are going to go away for the long weekend, you won't be able to write, just let us know and we'll open the quiz a bit earlier for you, so like on Friday or Thursday or something if you want to, or next week. But yeah, just let us know up front, because every Monday we have to check and, okay, well, this person didn't write or that person didn't write, and we have to follow up with them, and it's like we're not in primary school anymore, so let's try and get this sorted out beforehand. Okay, if there's no other questions, then cool. See you guys next week. Cheers.